My friends, it has been a long road, and we've discussed many dangerous and fantastical dungeons within both the 7th Umbral Calamity and dawning of the 7th Astral Era. So it's only fitting that we finally discuss a location that encapsulates the transition of peace to war, as well as the foreboding prophecies of time yet to come. Gather around, my friends, for today we shall be discussing the mystery resting within the heart of Eorzea, the Keeper of the Lake, and his charge, Silvertear. To understand the dungeon known as Keeper of the Lake, we must first understand how it was formed and why. And to know this is to know the Battle of Silvertear Skies. This battle was waged about 15 years ago near the start of the year. You see, Garlemald had already annexed Alamigo in its entirety about 5 years prior to this event. And in that time, they had not only turned Girabania into a solid foothold, but they had also consolidated many of their resources to immediately and swiftly take over the rest of Aldenard in its entirety. This wasn't some minor invasion to steadily grab hold of Eorzea. It was a show of power, a swift and brutal display that would showcase just how outmatched and outgunned the city-states of Limsa, Ul'dah, Gridania, and Ishgard truly were. To that end, they had one of, if not the largest and most powerful ship at their disposal leading the charge. This colossal airship was known as the Agrias, and it, alongside the rest of the Garlean contingent, would prove their country's superiority over the third continent of Aldenard. You have to understand, from the Garlean perspective, they had no reason to believe that Aldenard would be any different from their conquest of Ilsabard and Othard. In fact, they thought it would be even easier. Ishgard was already showing signs of exhaustion from the Dragonsong War lasting 1,000 years. Gridania was randomly invaded by Alamigo less than 100 years ago, showing how unprepared they were if Garlemald came in with even more strength. Limsa was in the middle of a cultural shift, and Ul'dah's leadership was becoming more and more self-interested. The 14th Legion, led by Gaius von Belsar, was prepared to accept the united surrender of Eorzea's city-states once the Agrias was in position to crush any and all resistance. In the year 1562 of the 6th Astral Era, the Agrias was moving into position above Mordona, the center of the continent. But things did not go as planned. Gaius and the rest of his legion were expecting resistance from the city-states, but what rose to meet them were dragons. But leading the charge wasn't just any dragon. It was the Lord of Worms, the King of Kings, the father of all dragonkin, Midgardsormr. And the fight between Garlemald and the dragons would become historically known as the Battle of Silvertear Skies. This engagement was shockingly one-sided. Despite the firepower and technological superiority of the Garlean Empire, the Dragon King was able to rally and coordinate his people in ways that they weren't prepared for. For you see, when a dragon like Nidhogg sings and rallies his horde, understandably, it's often only his horde that answers. But things are different with Midgardsormr. Whenever he sings to his children, all of them answer. The dragon's size, speed, raw physical power, and magical breath attacks were more than a match for the Garlean airships and flying machines, especially with just how many dragons answered their king's call. But the Agrias, the Garlean flagship, Midgardsormr chose to handle that flying hunk of metal himself. The King of Kings, with his massive size, was able to coil around the gigantic airship like a snake entangling its prey. Not only that, but just one attack from his magical breath was able to rip into the entire hull of the Agrias as if carving through paper. Simply put, Garlemald was being overpowered and outmaneuvered by a foe that they didn't even think they were going to have to fight against. However, that begs the question, if they were so soundly defeated, why is the corpse of Megardzemer still wrapped around the Agrias to this day? That answer is simple. While the Dragon King was more than a match for the Garlean flagship, something went wrong. As the Agrias fell, almost every system within the airship began to reach critical levels. This resulted in the Agrias essentially turning into a gigantic cerulean bomb. A bomb that, when finally detonated, enveloped the entirety of the Dragon King's body. The detonation of the Agrias is ultimately what killed Megardzemer. It's theorized that the Agrias exploding was considered to be so powerful that it caused all the ether within Mor Dhona to rapidly condense and fracture, resulting in the field of massive crystals that you see covering the area to this day. However, I should stipulate that this is but one of the more popular theories as to why Mor Dhona suddenly crystallized after the Battle of Silvertear, as the ethereal fallout of that battle is still a hotly debated topic to this day. But either way, one trip to Mor Dhona will show you that even 15 years later, the results of that epic aerial battle are still very visible. But many people upon hearing this story ask the same question. Why? Why did Megardzemer, the King of Dragons, attack the Agrias with such force and determination in the first place? Because ultimately, not even the Garleans were expecting this. After the Agrias fell, they proceeded to retreat all the way back to Alamigo to rethink their conquest. Their first major invasion into Eorzea was a complete failure, and it failed due to forces beyond their understanding. Not only that, they lost the Agrias, which was one of, if not the most powerful airship at their disposal, so they lost a considerable amount of firepower alongside their failure. Which brings everything back to the King of Kings. Why did Megardzemer attack? He certainly had no love for the people of Eorzea. In fact, after losing multiple children to the hubris of man over thousands of years, he was becoming quite sick of people. No, his cause for action was determined many eras ago, back when he first arrived upon our star, back when he first communed with Hydaelyn, the goddess, and told her his tale of woe. There is a lot of mystery surrounding the original covenant that he and Hydaelyn formed all those years ago. But on some level, it's understood that in exchange for he and his 7 children being given a home here upon our star, Megardzemer would become one of Hydaelyn's greatest guardians, and his den would be Silvertear. Unfortunately, the Battle of Silvertear Skies is the only solid record I have of him fulfilling his role as a guardian. There may very well be undocumented events in which he caused or prevented major conflicts, but I certainly don't know of them yet. All the same, when Garlemald chose to move upon Mor Dhona, they chose poorly, and now you know the rest. But what of the dungeon known as Keeper of the Lake? What remains of it now, and why did people suddenly take an interest in this ruined airship and the dead dragon coiled around it? Simple. There were people who had reason to believe that Megardzemer wasn't actually dead, and that scared them. The leadership of Ishgard was concerned that if Megardzemer were to resurrect, he would rally the dragons in such great numbers that the Ishgardian sky would become dark with wings. In fact, they were so concerned that they called upon the Scions of the Seventh Dawn for aid in this investigation, and so the Scions would send their greatest champion, the hero known as the Warrior of Light, to determine the truth behind the Dragon King's corpse. The Warrior of Light would discover that much of the Agrias had actually been gutted by Garlemald over the past 15 years, likely to prevent their technology and materials from falling into Eorzean hands. All that remains now are hollow chunks of the airship that were either too large to take or too thoroughly damaged by the Dragon King to be considered usable. So, a small detachment of soldiers has been stationed at the wreck to not only deter looters, but to keep the secrets of their prized airship safe. Needless to say, the Warrior of Light was much too powerful to be stopped by some common grunts. They were able to defeat anyone stationed within the Agrias, as well as slaying any animals or monsters that had begun making the wreck their home. Slowly but surely, the Warrior of Light made their way up the charred remains of the Agrias, and finally reached the Dragon King's lifeless remains. A few wayward dragons and dragonlings seem to have been roosting up near Midgardsormr's head. Whether to guard him or simply nest near the Father of Dragons, it's hard to say, as they didn't walk away unscathed when they chose to attack the Warrior of Light for their trespass. As the Warrior of Light reaches the summit, the fears of Ishgard were indeed confirmed, as Midgardsormr's powerful soul had never traveled to the ethereal realm upon his death. Instead, he had chosen to linger upon the surface and bide his time until he could form a new body for himself. How he is capable of doing this is beyond me, as I have no record of any dragons possessing this level of spiritual and ethereal control, placing him on a level far beyond great wyrms like Hraesvelgr or Nidhogg. In his own words, he was drinking deep of Heidelin's body, and as such, his own form would gain new life. What this means is unclear, because many of his words are cryptic and strange. But he did make one thing very clear. Once he regains his strength, he will rise to join his son, Nidhogg, and burn Ishgard to the ground. The Ishgardians have barely endured a 1,000-year war against Nidhogg's brood. If the Dragon King himself joins in, there would be no chance at survival. However, after seeing that the Warrior of Light is one of Heidelin's chosen, he opts for a different and more passive approach for now. But that is a story for a different time. There is much to talk about in regards to Midgardsormr and his observations alongside the Warrior of Light, but those tales will have to wait for another day. For now, I hope you are content with having a better understanding of the Keeper of the Lake and the battle that created such a dangerous location in the first place. I promise that we will talk more on this topic later, when I have more time and, of course, more research. But, as always, I hope this knowledge serves you well in your journeys. And until we meet again, stay safe, my friends. Thank you all for watching to the end. If you enjoyed this video, why not subscribe and share this with your fellow adventurers? With your help, I'll try to reach out even further and bring even greater stories to you. Although, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge my biggest contributors. A grand thank you to Amina Viltaria, Slippers, Potato, Sage Mouse, Sinalv Bagel, Cizani, and Travan Shea, with an additional nod to the scholarships on screen. Links to things like my Twitter and that of my channel artist Caddy can be found in the description. Thank you all for your viewership as well as your support, and I hope all of you have a wonderful day. Class dismissed.